Hello, welcome to our fourth webinar in our Learning at Home series. Today's webinar is GCSE and A-Level exams, what is actually going on. And today we are joined by David Boddy. Hi, David.
Hi, Becky. Hello, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us. So David is a former UK senior school headmaster at one of London's top boys' schools, where he educated students from age 11 to 18. He was also the chairman of the UK Society of Head Teachers, and he is the author of 2 best-selling books about schooling and parenting. And he is now a Tutor Doctor franchisee in Central and West London, where he works with his dream team to help students across London. So thanks so much, David. We're so happy to have you here today.
It's a great pleasure, Becky. I hope I can help.
Oh, you definitely can. David, you are our resident expert in all things GCSE and A-levels. And I know that there are so many parents and students out there who they don't understand what's going on right now. There have been so many changes and it's been happening so rapidly. And we've been getting a lot of questions from families just trying to figure out what to do next and what's going to happen for their students. So I know that you can help with that and help ease some of those fears. So we're grateful to have you. As I said, we do have a bunch of questions from families, from students. And so I'd like to give a couple of those to you and get your response to them to see if we can help these parents.
Pleasure.
Perfect. So the first question that we've been hearing quite often is that many parents and students are unsure how grades will be assessed now. So can you maybe give them some guidance on how students are going to be assigned a final result this year?
Okay, so I think just to begin with, and there's quite a lot of detail in all of this, but just to begin with, let's begin with an overview of the situation. There are really 3 main aspects to the delivery of assessment grades. And then there's a final step if people need it, which is in fact that they can retake the GCSE exams. They can either retake it in the autumn, probably late September, early October, or the Department of Education this week has actually told us that there will be yet another opportunity in the summer of 2021. But let's look at the assessments so far, how those are going to be determined. So heads of centers, heads of examination centers, and these are usually the headmasters. They often delegate it to an exams officer, but basically the headmaster is usually the head of center. And now what the head of center first and foremost has to do, and they're beginning to do this quite literally as we speak, is take a look at students' past performance. Now, they are looking really up to the point where we went into lockdown. So the work that's been submitted and has been marked up until that particular point is going to be the main work that is assessed. So the teachers and the head of center will be looking at the students' mock exam results. That may be a little bit of a shock for some students, of course, because mocks are not necessarily given the importance that they deserve. They'll take a look at other internal assessments that the teachers may well have done. They'll take a look at submitted work. And perhaps one of the things that parents are not so understanding of is that schools keep a lot of data week by week on the progress of a student. Many schools, for example, put youngsters through an assessment when they join the school at, say, aged 11 or age 13, and their progress is continually tracked against that. That's the internal school mechanism for deciding whether or not the pupil is going above the line and succeeding or dropping below the line and in some way kind of failing. It's a really good check on progress step by step as we go. Now, a lot of that data is already available to the relevant authorities. So when we take a look at what past work is all about, it isn't just the last few essays. It's much more holistic than that. So initially, these kind of assessments will be made. Now, it's not all going to be left to the one teacher who maybe have been teaching your son or your daughter. At least 2 teachers need to get involved in that kind of assessment. And that will usually be the head of department plus the particular teacher. But if the head of the department is your teacher, then a second person, quite often the head teacher or the deputy head teacher, is going to be involved. So teachers already have quite a clear sense of where the student is. Once they've done that, they start to grade the students to give them an indicative grade. So if we take, for example, GCSE, the top grade is 9, the bottom grade is 1, they're going to ensure that there is some more significant look at the level that you could be achieving. In fact, the Department of Education has recommended a 17-point grade scale. So take, for example, if once they've looked at all of your work and they say, you are definitely a grade 9, you're definitely at the top of the tree, but how secure is that? So they will grade you as if you're totally secure on grade 9, they'll identify you as what they would call a 9-9. If you're just scraping on the edge of a top 8 and possibly flipping into a 9, they'll grade you as 9-1 or 9-2. So there is some finessing, if you like, of those grades. So they've taken a look at all of this work and they've finessed the grades as best as they possibly can. Then they will go to the second step. And the second step is to frankly rate or rank those students across the whole class. Now, let's say, for example, you're in a class where 15 of the students are all ranked as grade 5. Now, the teachers are not going to let it rest there. Working again with the head of center, who's, as I say, usually the headmaster or the examination officer, they are going to say, well, once again, are you a very secure grade 5? You've got 15 students in the class at grade 5. How do we differentiate between them? Well, once again, they take a look, is that student a really secure grade 5 or not such a secure grade 5? So they will rank like that. So when the teachers are asked to submit their data, and when the examination board asks for the data to be submitted, and currently the date for that submission is around about May the 26th. When they ask them to sort of submit that data, they will submit the individual student's projected grade, assessed grade per subject. They will submit the class ranking from top of the class, basically, as it were, down to the bottom. And where there's a clutch, which there so often is in many classes, of students on the same grade, then they will be finessed as well. So that's the second step in the process. The teachers, by the way, all have to agree on the ranking. Common rooms in schools can be a feisty place at the best of times, and I think that this is going to be a real challenge for the teachers. But what they're trying to do is to make sure that favorites don't get better marks, or somebody who's fallen out of favor with their class teacher doesn't get downgraded as a consequence of that. So the teachers have to basically agree on the ranking. So you've got the assessment, then you've got the ranking, and then you come to the third step, which is what they describe as standardization. Now, this is something that will be done by the exam boards. They are currently working with Ofqual, which is the oversight body on all of these examinations. They're currently working up a new model. They haven't given too many details as yet as to what that model will look like, but they have said that they will be looking at a couple of things. One is, what is the expected grade distribution from that school historically? What is the expected grade distribution from a year 11 cohort historically? And then they will take a look at the wider view with regards to the school's results. Now, I would be pressing hard for, and I think this will happen, for schools not just to take last year's results, or for the exam boards not just to take last year's results, but perhaps something over the last 3 years. And what they're trying to determine is, are these assessed grades materially up on what the school has previously achieved, or basically are they down? If they're too far up, then the school will basically, those grades will be slightly downgraded. If they're too far down, then those grades will be brought up, back up. The standardization process also is going to take a look at, we know historically that X percentage of students achieved A grades, in A-levels, Y percent of students achieved 7s in GCSEs and so forth. And they're going to take a look to say, well, is the assessed grades we've been delivered out of sync with all of that? It's got to be in that kind of parameter in order for it to be an acceptable grade. Now, the person who's really got their head on the block on this is the head of center. As I've said, that's often the head teacher working with an examinations officer. It's a pretty kind of difficult job anyway when exams are taking place normally. And I feel sorry for my former colleagues at this time, because really they have got a real difficult position to work through. Now, it does appear that those grade assessments will be made public in the early part of August. Initially, they thought the late July, then they were saying perhaps at the normal examination time, but they're now, I think, aiming for the early part of August. They haven't yet given a date. At that point, a student will be able to decide, this is not really fair. What can I do about it? Regrettably, there's not much that the individual student will be able to do about that assessment at that stage, because the assessed grades given by the school, once they've been through the standardization process, could change. So there's not much. The normal process that does exist, whereby people can challenge the results that they're given, that is not really going to be available. So the option for students will be, if you're not happy, then you are going to need to consider taking those GCSE exams. Now, you've got two options on this. Either you take them in the autumn before you get too far involved in your next studies. So for example, with GCSE students, they take them in the autumn while they're commencing their A-level studies. Or, and this is an interesting development, they can take them in the summer of 2021. Now, I spoke to the Department of Education just before this webinar today, and I asked the question, if a student's assessed grades are sufficient to get them a place in a sixth form college, or in their school sixth form, could they do their first year 12 studies of A-levels and take the GCSE exam, looking at year 10 work and year 11 work, at the end of that year 12 study? And the answer to that is going to be highly likely. So really, if you take a holistic look at the whole thing, you've got the assessment process, and they're trying to finesse it so that it is as fair as possible. Nobody thinks this is the perfect system. Or you can take the exams in the autumn, or you can take the exams in the summer of 2021. and all of the results will stand. So whatever your assessed results, whatever your autumn results are, and if you happen to want to take retake the tests in the summer of 2021, all of those results will stand. So it's a little bit complex, but Ofqual in particular and the exam boards are working very hard to make it as fair as possible. It's not perfect, but under these difficult circumstances, personally, I don't think it's a bad shot at getting something which will look after most pupils. There is an issue with regards to private candidates. That's a little bit more problematic. Would you like me just to go forward with something on the private candidates, just to get it all out?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. We have but I just want to mention quickly, we have some questions coming into the Q&A box. So please, if you have questions for David, pop them into that Q&A section. We will take some time towards the end to answer those. And if we don't get to them, we will send out a document afterwards answering those questions for you. I do just want to be cognizant of time, David, because we're at about, well, it's 11:20 here for me, so 4:20 for you. So we do want to make sure that we have some time for those questions at the end. But yes, please tell us about the private sector.
Yeah, I think the private students are important. These are students who are not being officially schooled by an exam center. And they have made an arrangement with the exam center to have their exams taken there. So what those private students have to do, and they broadly should either have done it or be certainly on the case right now, is to submit evidence of their past work to the exam center. Now, the head of center has to take a decision as to whether or not they have sufficient evidence to be able to assess the grade and then importantly include them in the ranking. And I suspect that for many students, the many private students this is, they're going to find it difficult to convince the head of center that there is enough evidence. So the head of center has the ability to reject listing or ranking that student and therefore giving them an assessed grade, because they have to make what they call an objective holistic assessment of all of this. The Department of Education is still looking at what some of the alternatives for private candidates might be if they can't get the head of center to accept their submissions. But the most likely thing is that those private candidates are going to be encouraged to take the exams in the autumn or in the summer. I hope it gives you the overview. There's a lot of information, and it isn't as clear as anyone would like it to be, but day by day, we hope we are getting it clearer and the help for our parents and students.
It's very complicated the way that they're working through these issues. And I know that parents will appreciate having kind of a layman take on it. So thank you for that. To follow up all that you've just said, I think one of the biggest questions for parents right now is, what is the best way for me to support my child through all of this?
Okay, it's a really, really very good question. And I would say the best way to help support the youngster is first and foremost to do your very best to keep the motivation high, to eliminate any idea that you are going to be seriously disadvantaged by this system. Both Ofqual and the Department of Education have said that whatever results you achieve, whether it be by assessment or by the taking of exams, they will stand. That means that they will hold pari passu with the quality of any previous examinations. So past GCSE students, past A-level students who've been able to sit exams, present their examination results to the next education institution as evidence of how they are proceeding, and nobody ever questions that, well, nobody's going to question these assessed results as well. So I think that's an important message to give to the students. I think the second thing is to do your very best to keep the youngster working at some level, and beginning to sort of recognize that there are gaps that they're going to have faced as a consequence of all being locked up like this. There will be educational gaps. And as you go to the next stage, you are going to have those gaps filled in. One thing that is not necessarily to be thought about now, but should be remembered and thought about into the future, is that a year 11 student taking his or her GCSEs this year, of course, they're not going to experience what it's like to sit public exams and the pressure of all of that. The next time that's going to happen, let's assume they just accept their assessed grades and they don't bother to take an examination. The next time that that's going to happen is 2 years later when they're taking their A-levels. Now, they may never have taken or sat through the stresses and the difficulties and the challenges of taking a public exam. Or if they took an 11+ exam in the early phase of their education, by the time they get to their A-levels, it will be an 8-year gap. It's a long time. And the parents are going to need, I think, to help students going forward gain better examination techniques, better study techniques, so that they are better prepared. They won't have had a dry run. GCSEs are often regarded as a dry run for A-levels. Well, these students won't have had it. And that could be a challenging situation for some of them. So in essence, keep them working and keep them motivated and eliminate from their minds that they are somehow being disadvantaged.
Mm-hmm. Those are all really good points. And I like that you called out that they won't have had the opportunity to experience this, to experience the testing situation, because having been there before with their GCSE exams would make it, would definitely reduce their anxiety about sitting the A-level exams. So I think that's a really important point to call out for parents, that if your student has demonstrated any kind of test anxiety in the past, or even if it's going to be a new thing for them, that's something that they will need assistance to address. And so reach out to us, reach out to your school to find ways to help them to work through that anxiety in order to help them perform the best they possibly can when it does come time for them to sit those standard public exams the way that they historically have. Those are all really great points, David. And our Q&A section it's filling up really quickly, which is wonderful. So please keep submitting your questions for us. I'd like to actually switch to answer some of those specific questions that people who are joining us have, because we do have quite a few of them, which is wonderful. And as I said, if we don't get to your question here live on the webinar, we'll do our best to answer it in a document that we send out afterwards for you. So the first question we have here, David, is there any information on how homeschool students will be assessed?
Homeschool students will classify as private students, and they should have made contact already with exam centers, and they should fall under that category that I was explaining of the way in which private students are going to be assessed. Private students here doesn't mean private school students. It just means students who have not been basically involved in the traditional educational system. So homeschooled students, distance learning students, these all qualify as private students. And you need to submit your material of evidence as to the levels of the homeschooled student or the distance learning student, and let the exam center respond. But as I was saying, it's not easy for the exam center if they know nothing about you to make that. So do not be surprised if you may be disappointed, but don't be surprised if they say, terribly sorry, we can't process this. You will have to take the exam.
Okay, so that's a good thing for parents to be aware of, because if your student is in that situation, then you need to be prepared for if that is the way that the exam board chooses to assess your student. So that is a good point to know. So we have another question here about resits. So if a student opts to resit in 2021, can he or she attend school in year 11 again?
That would be entirely up to the school. And I think the schools will be very sympathetic to that. Over the last few days, I've had quite a few conversations with headmasters, and they are very sympathetic to that. The head teachers will have some scheduling issues and teacher allocation issues, but they're very sympathetic to year 11 being repeated. However, they're also sympathetic to students with assessed grades that they're comfortable with going into year 12 and then taking the GCSEs at the end of year 12. So they're doing effectively parallel courses. They would probably need support with the GCSE program as they're going through year 12. But of course, what we used to call the AS exams are no longer there at the end of year 12. And so there's a gap. And that may well be a better way to do it. Students tend not to like to be seen to be treading water and going back a year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that actually brings us into the next question really well. If my student does need to resit, what does this mean for her in regards to next steps if she's due to start A-levels, but her grades are not good enough?
Okay, so again, this is not as clear as we would definitely like it to be. If her assessed grades have her kind of on the edge and the school is requiring a certain grade level for the subject that she wants to study at A-level, then the schools are likely, and it's useful to have a conversation with them, but the schools are likely to say, well, bring her in, let her resit in the autumn, the GCSEs, and we'll make a definite decision. State schools, where you're dealing with hundreds of students at these cohorts, they're not quite so flexible, but I think you'd find that the independent schools are more flexible on that. But I think the important thing is to get into communication with the school, particularly if their assessed grades are kind of on the boundary and it's not absolutely certain. I suspect many will allow them through into the sixth form.
So what I'm hearing you say in response to several of these questions, and I think it's a good thing to call out for parents, is that if you're not sure, if you want to know what options are available to your child, reach out to the school because they will have the best idea of how they're going to handle your student's particular situation. Would you agree with that?
I would. Where the student is already at the school, say in year 11, and intends to go forward into the sixth form, year 12 and year 13 at the same school, it's an easier situation. It's a more difficult situation. I was dealing with this the other day as well, where the parent wants to change at the end of year 11 and move into a different school. That's where the discussion is going to be a little bit more difficult, but far more essential.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I think that's also a really important thing to make sure that we highlight. So we have another question here. Will students be expected to pay to take the exam?
I'm afraid so, yes. There's been no mention that the examinations will be delivered free of charge. There's a lot of comment and conversation around this and related issues, but as it stands at the moment, yes, they'll need to pay again.
Okay, good to know, thank you. I think we kind of touched on this one, but it would be good to just make sure that it's clear for parents. What happens if a student hasn't done as well in their mock exams as the teacher knows that they're able to achieve?
I wouldn't be overly worried about that because the teachers, as I was explaining at the beginning, have a lot of other data available. They will have data well recorded from year 10, as well as the early stages of year 11. So, of course, it's an ideal situation if the person's done well in the mocks, but many don't take the mock exams that seriously. And the other thing, which teachers know, and I think it's a good thing in some ways that the teachers are playing such a a high profile role in these assessments, teachers know that they mark mock exams hard. I used to give, as a head, I used to give my heads of department really clear instructions to mark the mocks hard, because that was an incentive for the youngsters to work pretty well after they got their exam results. But the schools know all of this. You'll be surprised at how much data schools actually, assessment data schools actually hold on pupils. And the inspection authorities, both at the state level and at the independent level, require schools to submit that data on a regular basis. And so to be able to say that student is worth this grade, and to look back and see what the previous assessment data was showing, should give a fairly clear insight into what the pupil could have achieved. What, of course, the assessment process that we're having to go through does not indicate is the way in which a youngster can perform on a given exam day. We always used to work on the basis that during the course of an exam season, a youngster would have at least one bad exam day. That's just the kind of nature of it. The pressure builds up, they get tired, they maybe get overconfident if they think some of the papers beforehand have gone well and so forth. They end up having a bad exam day. And that's not going to be taken into account. And there are also other youngsters who somehow you walk into the exam room and wow, they've been waiting for this all their lives and they really excel. Those characters are probably going to be, to some extent, a little bit disadvantaged. But in the round, they call it an holistic assessment. I think in the round, the data will be there to give a fair assessment. That plus the ranking, plus the standardization will get you pretty close to what would have happened had the exams taken place.
Wonderful, thank you. To actually go off of that, I think this question fits in well. So if those results that they've assigned students are going to stand, is it going to be an average, or are future employers going to see up to 3 separate grades?
So if they get an assessed result and then they take the examination in the autumn and then they take it again in the summer, all 3 exam results will stand, okay? But individuals are individuals, and my advice to a pupil would be, show the employer your best result. I don't think anybody necessarily needs to see the lot. And likewise with university entrance. GCSE results are very important actually for university entrance, because particularly on university courses which are popular, the universities process the GCSE results, just goes through the computer. So I would be encouraging the pupils to submit their best results. All 3 stand, but I'd be encouraging them to submit the best results. Great,
thank you. So we've touched on a lot of these questions here. Oh, here's one. Any views on those resitting GCSEs this year who are in smaller classes? Will there be a disadvantage for those students?
In terms of assessed grades, not really. It's a very, very good question, because obviously in the ranking, there's going to be a smaller number of students to rank. And this is why the standardization process is going to be important as well. This is a kind of support mechanism for such students. Quite a lot of these pupils in smaller classes are attending independent schools and so forth. And those independent schools generally have very high grades. That's just a sort of experience. That's been the case over a number of years. So I mentioned at the beginning the sort of 17-point system within each grade. Are you a secure 8? Are you a less secure 8? Are you verging basically on a 7, or whatever the case may be? That sort of finessing of those grades will be important, and it's that finessing which then leads to the ranking. So there may be a little bit of disadvantage, but not significant, I would say.
Okay, great. So we have another question here. So this parent is saying that their daughter is very determined. She's studying every day. She's really focused and giving this her all. She only got a 3 in her science mock, and the teacher isn't really involved very much right now. So how can they get the school's attention and let them know that the daughter is working so hard, that she's got a good grade, that she's working with a tutor, in order to have that considered in the assessed grade that she's given?
Okay. My advice in this situation is I would write a letter. I would actually hand write a letter and send it to the head of department and copy it to the head teacher. Why not an email? Well, the email boxes are being full at the moment. And I would give the letter of the tone of, I thought you would like to know that this has been the response of my daughter to the recent situation. I just thought you would like to know that. Teachers and heads of exam centers have been warned by the Department of Education not to get into discussion with parents about potential grades. And you can see, obviously, why that is. It would be very difficult for the teachers, very difficult for the head of center, who has to justify what he ultimately submits to the exam boards, and to do so, as it were, independent of any other influence. They're trying hard to get away from the relationship being like between the teacher and the particular pupil. They're trying to give it a much wider assessment than that. But in this case, I think a letter is worthwhile. I think a letter is worthwhile. And I would also try to keep her spirits up, because she does have an opportunity in the autumn, if she needs to take the exam. If she is really working this hard, it's fantastic to hear that she is. And I've heard of a few students who are doing this, which is really, really encouraging. These students who are working this hard, really, the exam is not something to be fearful of. The exam is something actually that gives another opportunity to really show what you can do. And I would say to her, you should take it.
Great, and I definitely agree that it's wonderful to see her taking so much initiative and being so motivated in her own studies. So I think that as a parent, you definitely need to give her a high five and a great job, and really encourage her in that, because we're proud of her. We're happy to hear that. Okay, so will students be allowed to take the autumn 2020 exams and the summer 2021 exams if they want to try and improve their autumn grade?
At this stage, it looks like that is going to be possible. Yes. There's a little bit of a gray area here, but it does look like that is going to be possible, so that they have 2 shots at it effectively.
Okay, great. So you kind of touched on that the work that was done before lockdown is going to be used in determining these final assessment grades. But is the ongoing online work that they're doing currently, is it going to be counted?
No, that won't be counted. But what it, of course, will do is prep them for the exams if they are wanting to or needing to take them. Needing to take them. So that's very supportive in that. And of course, if you are, for example, a GCSE student and you're going to come out with a high level of assessed grades and you're going to go into year 12, what you do have to recognize, and this is a challenge every school faces in the transition from year 11 to 12, is that the level and the quality required in A-level is significantly higher than at GCSE. For example, if I take maths as an example, a youngster achieving a 7 or an 8 in GCSE maths is working at the equivalent of a D in A-level maths. Okay, so there's a big gap between. So one of the problems that I used to face as a head is that my sort of sparky year 11s who came in with, in those days, with their A grades and A-star grades and so forth, you say, hey, so I'm going to swim through the A-levels, aren't I? And I used to say, well, actually, possibly not, my friend, because that level of confidence, if you take that level of confidence and then just do no work, you're going to find yourself in trouble. And many of them did, because they didn't recognize the difference in the depth of work required at A level. So for the year 11 students now who are feeling confident about the assessment, they do need to press on and possibly even open up the year 12 studies a little bit, get a little bit ahead of the game, because when they hit it, they're going to find that there's a very, very big gap that they've got to transition anyway.
So it's an opportunity to make sure that you're solid in your foundations from
Absolutely.
your GCSE level years, and then start prepping for A level.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Good. That's really good advice for students, and I think those that take this opportunity to do that, they're going to find themselves much better set when they start their A levels, and much better prepared for that transition.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So with that, there's actually a question here that I think kind of goes well here. Any thoughts about year 10 and year 12 students who would normally be sitting some kind of mocks this year? How should they be preparing for next year?
Okay. So there are two issues around year 10 students. Sometimes year 10 students take GCSEs early in one or two subjects so that they get them out of the way, and then they can concentrate on the remainder of the subjects in year 11. This year, they're not going to be allowed to do that. And they're not going to be subject to this assessment process. So they're going to have to take all their GCSEs in year 11. As far as the year 10 mocks are concerned, they really should be concentrating and working hard on those, because goodness me, let's hope we're well and truly out of a similar situation this time next year. But whether we are or not, all of your assessments do count in some way. All of your assessments, your internal school assessments, the way in which you're graded in school and so forth, and the data the school is keeping week by week on you, it does all count. And the wise thing to do, is frankly to keep going and to keep working. But you can't take those exams that you may have wanted to have taken at GCSE in year 10, you can't take them. I'm afraid you'll have to wait till next year.
Okay, that's really good for parents to know, and maybe those students can use this time as well to get a leg up and start preparing for those, because they're going to have a heavier exam load in year 11. Okay, so this is a good one. So students who have been given a conditional offer by universities, what happens if they don't hit the minimum grade required with the current grading plan?
Well, sometimes when the clouds are dark, it's nice to see a silver lining somewhere. And one of the silver linings is in this territory here. And the silver lining is this: UK universities, even the Russell Group, which is the sort of top band of universities, are probably going to have more spaces available on more courses than at any time in the last decade. And the reason for that is that about only 1 in 3 of the international students who've applied to go to UK universities will actually take up their spaces. Now, the universities have recognized that there could be a dash for good students, domestically good students, and that they do have available to them a number of mechanisms to attract a particular student, not least of all giving an unconditional offer. Recently, Universities UK, which is the governing body of our universities, has basically said that the universities need to cooperate with each other so that effectively there will be a cap on numbers, one university to another university, but there will still be spaces available. Where the grade is close to the assessed grade I'm talking about, is close to what the university offer would be. On results day, it will be very, very wise to get straight on the phone to that university. There's a process in the UK called clearing. For many years, it used to be just a scenario where the student who failed to get the grades sort of looked around in the supermarket of courses available and tried to get on a course. However, in the last few years, opportunities have been made available so that students who perhaps achieved more than what they were expected to achieve could go and look for another course at a higher graded university with these better grades, so they can kind of, if you like, upskill on all of this. But the overriding message here is, again, if you're close to it with the assessed grade and you've just appeared to miss out, use that clearing process quickly, get onto the university quickly. And I think that there will not be that many disappointed youngsters at the end of this particular exercise because of the fact that more space generally is going to be available.
Wonderful. I hope that that is reassuring for that parent that submitted that question and any parents who had a similar question. We've got about 10 minutes left. Time has just flown. We have quite a few questions to go, so I'm going to just hit one or two in the next few minutes that we have left. But if we don't get to your question, we'll do our best to answer it in a follow-up document that we'll send out to you after the webinar. So here's a fairly quick one. Can students resit only one or two subjects, or do they have to resit all subjects?
It appears that they can resit one or two.
Great. That is good to know. Okay. Sorry, I'm just taking a quick look. Oh, will BTech students be treated the same way as GCSE pupils?
I understand so, but there is a little uncertainty around that at the moment. I see no reason why BTech students wouldn't be treated in exactly the same way, but a little more clarity is still required in that.
Okay, great. We have some confusion about the 17-point system that you were saying. Each grade will have 17 points. Can you maybe just re-clarify that a little bit?
Okay, so the teachers working together with the head of department and so forth will give the grade, will basically give a grade. And then they will begin to finesse it. Okay, so is this grade that I'm being given absolutely secure? In which case the grade would be, say for example, it's a grade 9. You'd get the grade. You'd be graded as grade 9-9. If it was not so secure, you'd be graded as 9-1. If you were really certain to get a grade 8, that's where you were, you'd be graded as grade 8-9. So they're finessing it at grade by grade, as it were, by 9 levels across the 8 grades that are possible to achieve here. That's where you get the 17 from. So it's a way in which the head of center and the teachers can finesse what they're going to put into the ranking.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I hope that cleared it up for anybody that was feeling a little bit of confusion about that. So we've got time for one more question. Is there a timeline for the autumn exams? So if they resit in September, when will they get their results back? it wouldn't be feasible to wait 3 months for the result, as this will mean they could be 3 months behind starting their A-levels. I think you kind of touched on that, but do we have an idea of when the results will come back from those autumn resits?
We don't, not at this stage, but the exam boards are putting in place arrangements at the moment to basically mark the exams very, very quickly and send the results back far quicker than is normally the case within the traditional examination season. So I don't think they'll be waiting for 3 months, but I suspect they'll be looking at 3 to 4 weeks to get those results back. But nobody has formally said or committed to a timescale on this at the moment.
Okay, great. Actually, we can fit in one more. What happens if some area of the syllabus was not assessed before the lockdown happened?
Well, that will be taken into account by the other criteria that they're looking at. So yes, there will be the mock exams, there will be essays submitted, kind of internal coursework. They'll be taking a look at the way in which the student performed in year 10 and those other internal assessments and so forth. So the fact that a particular aspect of the curriculum hasn't been covered will not be a disadvantage.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so we are coming close to the top of the hour. David, do you have any last words for parents and students to kind of help them with all of this?
I think it's possibly part of my nature, really, which is just to keep going and stay positive on it. I suspect people will look back on it and say, well, that was one heck of an experience, but we're through it. Mm-hmm. But I actually come back in terms of advice to the kind of critical point for the youngsters who are not taking exams at year 11, or youngsters not taking exams at year 13 because of the circumstance. Their assessed grades are okay. When they take their next set of formal exams, they are going to need support through that. Learning how to take exams is an art in itself. I just briefly tell a story. I learned to drive at a very young age in my native country of New Zealand. I came to the United Kingdom, very confident driver, but failed my driving test twice, actually, I'm sorry to say, but because I hadn't learned how to pass the test, because it's an art in itself. Learning how to pass exams is an art in itself. And I know we here at Tutor Doctor spend a lot of time in doing this and helping students to do this, but it is going to be even more important for these youngsters directly affected in years 11 and 13 this year as a consequence of this virus.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we do have a special offer coming after the webinar for those of you who have joined us, and it will help to support your students in learning how to take the test, or just keeping them afloat right now, getting them prepared for next year. So please keep your eye out for that. That will be coming after the webinar with the recording. We had a lot of questions today. We didn't get to all of them, so we will do our best to answer some of those in a follow-up document for you as well, and give you some resources that you can use in order to keep on top of what is going on with the changes that are happening all the time. So please stay tuned for that. You will see that come out to you in the next couple of days. So I would like to thank you so much for joining us, David. As I said, you are our resident GCSE and A-level expert. So we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with families and with students, and helping them to kind of understand what's going on and what am I going to do now. So thank you for that, David.
It's been a pleasure. I hope it's been helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. We will have another webinar 2 weeks from today, so we'll be sending out the registration for that soon, so stay tuned. And then keep your eye on your inbox for that follow-up email with today's recording, your special offer, and those additional resources for you. Okay, Thanks, everyone. Stay well and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Becky.
Bye, David. Thank you.